Good morning. Thank you for taking part in this fiscal year 2018 training on state purchasing procedures and the State Purchasing Card Program. I am Courtney Sisk-Johnson with the Purchasing Division, and I'm pleased to welcome all West Virginia state officials who are required to take this annual training. I know that all of you have busy schedules, so I appreciate you taking 2 hours of your day today to participate in this session. West Virginia Code 5A-3-60 requires certain state officials to take 2 hours of training annually on purchasing procedures and purchasing card use. Those required to take this training include all executive department cabinet secretaries and their deputies, commissioners and their deputies and assistant commissioners, directors and their deputies and assistant directors, and department heads and their deputies and department assistants. This training is offered twice per fiscal year via WebEx. These sessions are also recorded and made available online on the State Auditor's Office and Purchasing Division's websites. The online recording will suffice to meet this requirement for anyone who is unable to participate in one of the 2 scheduled live webinars. For those individuals who choose to view the online recording, they must send us their certificate of completion to ensure that they receive credit for viewing the training. Today's session will last until approximately 11 o'clock. I will begin with information on the state purchasing procedures, and I will be followed by Travis Mullinax from the State Auditor's Office. The Purchasing Division has a staff of approximately 55 full-time employees at the Capitol Complex in Building 15 and at the Surplus Property location in Dunbar. The Purchasing Division provides a service function to your agencies. We are responsible for the procurement of goods and services that your organization needs to operate your programs and services. These are the people who help make that happen. As mentioned, today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the Purchasing Division's website and also on the State Auditor's Office website within the next couple of weeks. This live webinar and its recording have been approved for 2.4 hours of in-house online CLE credit from the West Virginia State Bar. If you are interested in obtaining CLE credits for today's live webinar, please email your name and bar ID number to Samantha Knapp at the email address located on this screen. Should you have any questions throughout today's presentation, you may type them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer these questions. Those of you on today's webinar represent the top level of management within state government. You are all responsible for leading and managing the delivery of services required of your agencies to the citizens of West Virginia. For your agencies to be successful in delivering these mandated services to our citizens, your agencies need many different types of commodities and services. The Purchasing Division's core function is to obtain on your behalf the commodities and services needed to allow you to fulfill your mission. We depend on and work closely with your procurement staff to fulfill those needs. On this slide, you can see the Purchasing Division's mission, and that is to provide prudent and fair spending practices in procuring quality goods and services at the lowest cost to state taxpayers by maximizing efficiencies and offering guidance to our customers. During today's webinar, we hope that you will obtain a general understanding of who we are, but also what we do and how we do it. Before we talk about the process of procurement, I would like to review the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division. As you can see on the screen, Mike Sheets serves as the Director of the Purchasing Division. The division is then made up of 3 sections in addition to our legal counsel. They include the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section, the Communication and Technical Services section, and Program Services. The following staff members oversee these various sections. Assistant Director Frank Whitaker oversees the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section. Assistant Director Diane Hawley Brown oversees the Communication and Technical Services section. Assistant Director Elizabeth Perdue oversees Program Services. Additionally, Jimmy Meadows serves as the Purchasing Division's General Counsel. Now I will highlight the responsibilities of each section. The Acquisitions and Contract Administration section is responsible for processing purchases expected to exceed $25,000 on behalf of state agencies which fall under our authority. This section also maintains the contract management and agency inspection services programs. We have a staff of 12 buyers and supervisors who are responsible for obtaining the commodities and services on behalf of state agencies. Our buyers are assigned by agency rather than by commodity. They serve as the subject matter experts on the state purchasing process rather than on the specific commodities and services that they buy. The reason we're organized this way is because we believe our expertise should be in our core mission, which is purchasing, and the staff within your agencies have the specific technical expertise, in most cases, of the commodities and services that you need. To assist your agencies in developing specifications, the Purchasing Division has created a specification repository, which is to be used as the starting point for agencies. These specification templates, which are now posted on our website, can be used and modified by the agency as needed. We currently have specifications for elevator and HVAC maintenance and look to add more in the coming months. Looking back at our structure, having our buyers assigned to specific agencies means that each of your agencies has a sole point of contact in the Purchasing Division, which allows the division to provide better customer service to your agencies. The assigned buyer for your agency works together with your agency-designated procurement officer or officers to buy the commodities and services required by your agencies. We feel these relationships are critical in ensuring success during the procurement process. The next section of the Purchasing Division is the Communication and Technical Services section. This section is responsible for technology, communication, professional development and training, and related administrative functions, including vendor registration, imaging and record retention, bid receipt, and purchase order encumbrance. The final section is Program Services. This section is responsible for several programs administered by the division, including the Surplus Property Program, which manages the state and federal programs for property no longer needed within the respective governments, the Travel Management Office, which offers guidance to state business travelers and oversees statewide contracts for travel-related services, the Fixed Assets Unit, which maintains the state's inventory of personal property. As mentioned previously, we also have a general counsel who manages our legal affairs, including contract terms and conditions, disputes and resolutions, drafting legislation, and other relevant legal and administrative issues. Most state governments throughout the nation have a centralized procurement function like West Virginia. However, the administration and rules vary with each state. West Virginia Code centralizes the procurement function of state government within the Purchasing Division in the same way that other functions are centralized for most agencies, such as personnel, technology, finance, and retirement. Some of the benefits of a centralized procurement function include have the consistency of laws, rules and procedures, gaining economies of scale, and providing system transparency. The Purchasing Division manages procurement transactions for agencies under its authority, including but not limited to those for commodities, services, and technology. State agencies have been delegated the authority to make purchases up to $25,000, with the Purchasing Division processing all transactions expected to exceed that dollar threshold. The Purchasing Division has awarded statewide contracts for commonly used commodities and services, including office supplies, technology equipment and services, and vehicles, just to name a few. We bid and award statewide contracts for these common commodities and services on behalf of all state agencies to take advantage of the economies of scale and to make the ordering process more efficient. A list of all statewide contracts can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. We also buy a wide range of agency-specific commodities and services, including food to medical supplies and everything in between. We participate in cooperative contracts that have been bid and awarded by other public entities around the country to gain economies of scale and shorten the procurement process. These contracts may be used by our agencies upon approval. All of our procedures are based on laws and rules established in West Virginia Code and the West Virginia Code of State Rules. Our primary code citation is 5A-3, and our rules can be found as Title 148, Series 1 of the Code of State Rules. As noted on this slide, there are also specific code citations for architectural and engineering services, construction, and our two set-aside programs, correctional industries, and the state use program. As is the case with many other state functions, there are some exceptions to this centralized procurement system. The legislature has statutorily granted various state agencies the ability to perform some or all of those agencies' procurement functions outside of the centralized procurement mandate. At this time, the Purchasing Division is aware of 39 full or partial statutory exemptions. Full exemptions include entities such as the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and higher education, while partial exemptions have been granted for the Division of Highways for road construction and PEIA contracts for insurance coverage, among many others. The Purchasing Division has compiled an unofficial list of these statutory exemptions, which can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. Title 148 of the Code of State Rules stipulates that all purchases be approved by the Secretary or head of a spending unit or designee whose name must be filed with the Purchasing Division. The person designated is responsible for the agency's procurement function at the agency delegated level and works directly with the Purchasing Division to process formal acquisitions expected to exceed $25,000. They should be involved at all levels of any future purchases your agency plans to make. Their understanding and knowledge of the state purchasing process can ensure that your agency remains in compliance with state law. It is essential that the designated procurement officers are trained on the Purchasing Division's procedures. In addition to being responsible for any internal training conducted at the agency level, the designee is required by the West Virginia Code of State Rules to take 10 hours annually of training offered by the Purchasing Division, which is tracked on a fiscal year basis. The designated procurement officers for each state spending unit under our authority are listed on our website. This list is updated each fiscal year and as changes occur throughout the year. The link to this listing will be included at the end of our presentation today. We have a comprehensive training program to educate our agency purchasers on the laws and rules which govern the state purchasing process and to assist them in obtaining the 10 hours of required training annually. Trainings are offered through a variety of platforms, including in-person, online via webinars and training modules, and through an annual conference. Our 2018 Agency Purchasing Conference is scheduled for October 2nd through the 5th at Camp Dawson in Kingwood. We also maintain a state certification program which has been recognized by the Division of Personnel as part of its pay plan policy. That program incorporates public procurement experience, training offered by the Purchasing Division, a hands-on component, and a final examination. More information on our training program can be found on our website, wvpurchasing.gov, by clicking on the training link on the left-hand side of the page. During fiscal year 2017, the Purchasing Division reported that more than 19,000 new award transactions and delivery orders were processed, exceeding $335 million. This number includes all delivery orders processed against central master agreements at both the agency level, which are called agency delivery orders, and through the Purchasing Division, which are called central delivery orders. A central master agreement, which is processed by the Purchasing Division, covers a specified period in which all terms, conditions, and prices are stated, but quantity is not. Delivery orders may be made from these contracts for specific quantities. Nearly 55% of the contracts and delivery orders for fiscal year 2017 were awarded to West Virginia companies. In addition to new purchase and delivery orders, we also processed more than 2,000 change orders to existing contracts. These numbers show the significance of what we do. It's because this money comes from our taxpayer dollars that we have a duty to ensure that it is being spent efficiently and ethically. For this reason, we have developed a decision path to assist our agency purchasers from the time the agency determines a need to the award of a purchase order or contract. For additional statistical data for fiscal year 2017, please see our annual report that may be accessed from our homepage at wvpurchasing.gov. This slide highlights the first few steps in the purchasing division path. Step 1 requires the agency to first determine its need. In other words, what is the product or service required by the agency, what quality and quantity is needed, what's the estimated cost, and are there any special delivery requirements? Once your agency has determined that information, you can move on to step 2 of the process, which is seeking availability of the commodity or service through internal sources. There are 3 internal sources, including correctional industries, the State Use Program, also known as sheltered workshops, and the West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property. Correctional industries and sheltered workshops are mandatory for use. That means if the product or service is available through either of these entities, it must be acquired in this manner. If the product or service is available, but not in the required time, quality, quantity, or other factors, then a written waiver must be issued from correctional industries or sheltered workshops in accordance with purchasing guidelines. Surplus property is optional, but strongly encouraged for use for state agencies when needing furniture, vehicles, equipment, and many other commodities. A waiver from surplus property is not required, but keep in mind that it is another source that may save your agency money. If the product or service is not available from any of the internal sources, Step 3 requires the agency to determine if the product or service is available from an existing statewide or agency contract. If it is available from either of these types of contracts, the agency must purchase the product or service from that statewide or agency contract. Although we don't have it mentioned on this slide, if the commodity or service is not available from a statewide or agency contract, the next step requires the agency to determine if the purchase is considered an emergency purchase or sole source. I'll go into more detail about these purchase types later, but for your reference, more information on these types of purchases can be found in Section 3 of the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. If you've gone through the first few steps of the process and can't find the commodity or service on any of these mandatory contracts, and you've determined this will not be an emergency or sole source purchase, at this point you would be looking at the competitive bidding process. There are several types of competitive solicitations used by the Purchasing Division. I'll get into those in a minute, but first, please note that agencies are delegated the authority to purchase commodities and services up to $25,000, and there are some spending thresholds within that amount they should be aware of. The thresholds within agency delegated authority are outlined on this slide. Agencies cannot exceed a spending threshold without proper level of documentation and bidding. Commodities and services that are expected to cost $2,500 or less require no bids, although competition is always encouraged. Purchases of $2,500.01 to $5,000 require 3 verbal bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Purchases of $5,000.01 to $25,000 require 3 written bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Any purchase expected to exceed $25,000 is considered a formal purchase and must be processed through the Purchasing Division. In short, the agency would process the competitive solicitation at the agency level following its agency delegated procedures if it's expected to cost $25,000 or less, or at the formal level if it's expected to exceed $25,000. All vendors conducting business with the state of West Virginia are required to register with the Purchasing Division in accordance with West Virginia Code 5A-3-12. There is an exception to this registration requirement, which includes purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a spending unit. Keep in mind, vendors do not have to be an approved paid vendor to submit a bid, but only to receive a purchase order or contract. However, they may be required to create an account in Oasis to submit their bid electronically. Vendors are encouraged to register through the Vendor Self-Service Portal as part of WV Oasis, but may also still fill out a paper form through our registration office. Vendors receiving orders for goods or services exceeding $2,500, regardless of payment method, must pay an annual fee of $125. There are a couple of exceptions as to who must pay the fee. These include purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a spending unit, as well as sole source vendors and those vendors who are providing goods and services that have been declared as non-competitive exempted products or services listed in Section 9 of our Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. Vendors must also be in good standing with other state and local agencies, such as the Secretary of State's Office and Workers' Compensation, to be able to receive a purchase order or contract. Anytime your agency determines that it will need to competitively solicit goods or services, you should immediately begin to think about the specifications, which will be the basis for everything you'll do moving forward. A specification is a concise statement explaining the type of good or service that is needed, the quality level, and special requirements in the design, performance, delivery, and usage. There are 3 different types of specifications, which include brand name or equal, performance, and design. In short, the brand name or equal type requires the words or equal to follow the brand name to inform vendors that alternate bids will be considered. Please note that a legislative change effective June 8, 2018 will allow agencies to follow a process to create a standard, which may eliminate the need for the or equal language in some instances. The performance specification focuses more on how well an item operates and includes total ownership cost for operating and maintaining the product. The design specification concentrates on the dimensional and other physical requirements of the item being purchased and is used when a commodity has to be specially made to meet the agency's unique needs. Specifications are incorporated into the requisition that the agency submits to the Purchasing Division for formal purchases and into the solicitation advertised by agencies for agency delegated purchases. Not only do specifications tell the vendor exactly what your agency needs, they often serve as your defense if a vendor protests a contract award. We'll discuss protests a little later on. The Purchasing Division believes that specifications are so important that it introduced a new award at its conference last year based entirely on specifications. At this time, we are accepting nominations from agencies for the Excellence in Specification Writing Award. We'll announce the first recipient at the 2018 Agency Purchasing Conference. The award will be based on the following criteria: scope, money and pricing, administrative, time, and appearance and readability. A copy of the criteria for this award can be found on the Purchasing Division's intranet site. Now that we've discussed the importance of specifications, let's go over some of the competitive solicitation types used by the Purchasing Division. The most commonly used method of procurement is the Request for Quotations method, or RFQ. This type of purchase is used to acquire all tangible property, such as equipment and supplies. The basis for award with this method is straightforward. The award is made to the lowest responsible bidder who meets all mandatory specifications. The next type is a Request for Proposals method, referred to as an RFP, and is typically used for services. This type is a best value procurement method and is limited to procurements with an estimated value of $250,000 or more. The agency must obtain approval from the purchasing director to use this method. They must submit their justification for using this process in writing, whether the solicitation will ultimately replace a current purchase order or contract, and identify what that contract is if it does. The RFP is received in 2 distinct parts: the technical proposal and the cost proposal. The evaluation is based on a 100-point total score, with cost representing a minimum of 30 of the 100 points possible. The technical proposal is opened first, and the RFP Evaluation Committee reviews and evaluates those, sending their written consensus to the Purchasing Division buyer. Vendors must score a minimum of 70% of the 70 points possible to be considered. This is known as the minimum acceptable score. Vendors who do not obtain the minimum accepted score, which is 49 points in most cases, are disqualified and removed from further consideration. The cost proposals are then opened. The evaluation committee will review the cost proposals, assign appropriate points, and make a final consensus recommendation to the purchasing division buyer. The award is based on the highest score, which is the combination of the technical proposal and the cost proposal. A second best value procurement method that we utilize is the expression of interest, or EOI. This type is utilized in the procurement of architectural and engineering services for projects estimated to exceed $250,000. The EOI includes a statement of qualifications and performance data and may include a vendor's anticipated concepts and proposed methods of approach to approach project. The committee will evaluate the information submitted with the proposal and then develop a short list of 3 firms they believe are best qualified to perform the desired service. They'll then meet with each firm on the short list to conduct an interview to discuss their anticipated concepts and proposed methods. The committee will rank the firms deemed to be most highly qualified based on the information discussed during their interview and submit that list to the purchasing division. At that time, the agency will enter into negotiations with the most qualified firm as to the scope of service and price. If the agency fails to negotiate a satisfactory contract with the most qualified firm, they will then move on to the next firm. If negotiations fail with all firms, they will rebid the solicitation. The purchasing division uses Oasis, the state's enterprise resource planning system, and its vendor self-service vendor portal. Oasis allows us to advertise all solicitations expected to exceed $5,000, with vendors having access to that information in real time. The advertising mechanism in Oasis is called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. Using the vendor self-service vendor portal, vendors can search for current solicitations using keywords. They can view solicitations processed at the agency delegated level as well as those processed at the formal level. Within Oasis, solicitations are assigned an A or a C in front of the document name. Those with an A are processed at the agency level, and those with a C, which stands for centralized, are processed by the purchasing division. As previously mentioned, a vendor does not have to be registered to submit a bid, but will need to create an account if that bid is submitted electronically. One of the benefits of creating an account is that a vendor can assign itself commodity codes, which means that they would be notified any time a solicitation is publicized using those commodity codes. This makes it much easier for the vendor to stay informed of ongoing solicitations. The purchasing division requests the assistance of the state agency in evaluating the bids for its solicitations since they wrote the specifications and have a full understanding of what they need. After they review the bids, the agencies then submit a recommendation for award to the purchasing division. For formal acquisitions or those exceeding $25,000, the purchasing division is the only entity that can issue or change those contracts, and all questions regarding those contracts should be directed to the purchasing division buyer who is or was responsible for processing that contract. After the evaluation process, the purchasing division will send the contract to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Upon approval, the contract is then encumbered by the purchasing division and sent to the vendor. Encumbrance ensures that the agency has the funds to make the specific purchase. No work can begin until the vendor has the encumbered purchase order or contract in hand or until a notice to proceed is issued. The Code of State Rules gives vendors the opportunity to challenge the contract specifications written by the agency or to challenge the ultimate contract award. The protest of specifications allows the vendor to protest the specifications prior to the actual award being made and prior to bids being opened, and must be submitted no later than 5 working days prior to the bid opening. The protest of specifications is intended to guard against an agency that inadvertently drafted specifications that circumvent the requirement that competitive bids be obtained. This may be done by including specifications that are too restrictive, that only a few vendors can meet them, or by including specifications that are too vague, allowing vendors to provide a less than acceptable quality level, commodity, or service. The protest of award, on the other hand, is the most common type of protest received by the Purchasing Division. This type of protest must be submitted no later than 5 working days after the award is made, which is the day the contract is encumbered. There are several reasons a vendor may protest the contract of award. Some include the winning vendor may have bid inferior commodities that are not in fact equal. The winning vendor may have failed to meet a mandatory specification which was ultimately missed by the agency and/or the Purchasing Division during the evaluation process, or the winning vendor might not be a resident as they claimed and for which they received a preference during the evaluation process. So we've talked about the various types of competitive procurements, but now I want to touch on some other types. The first is sole source procurements. Sole source means that a commodity or service is unique in nature and is only available from one known vendor. Senate Bill 283, which passed during the 2018 regular session of the legislature, will change various aspects of the procurement process. Sole source procurements will be changed to direct award, which will ease these requirements. In all cases, the law requires that agencies document their attempts to secure competition. For purchases up to $25,000, the agency declares and processes its own sole source procurements and must provide written justification in the agency file. This will be important to remember for when our Purchasing Division inspectors go to your agency to inspect its purchases for compliance. For sole source procurements that are expected to exceed $25,000, the agency must complete and submit to the Purchasing Division a sole source request for consideration form to determine the basis for the sole source procurement and the specific efforts made to determine the availability of other sources. The Purchasing Division will then advertise the potential sole source purchase in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin that I talked about earlier on the vendor self-service to allow vendors the opportunity to express interest in the sole source procurement. What this means is that if a vendor expresses interest and provides proper documentation that they can in fact provide the commodity or service in question, then the Purchasing Division may reject the sole source and require the agency to competitively bid that commodity or service. If no vendors respond, however, the Purchasing Division may then proceed with a direct purchase with the sole source vendor. West Virginia Code also recognizes that purchases may be necessary when unforeseen causes arise, including delays by contractors, delays in transportation, an unanticipated volume of work, flooding to workplace buildings, power outages, or fires. 3 bids are required for emergency purchases if possible. Emergency purchases that are expected to exceed $25,000 must first be approved by the Purchasing Director. However, if the emergency occurs after business hours, on a weekend, or on a holiday, the agency may proceed with the emergency purchase but must follow up with the Purchasing Director on the first business day with their justification and all documentation. An emergency purchase is a short-term solution to fix a problem and may not be used as a permanent or long-term solution or to circumvent the normal competitive bidding process. Instead, an emergency purchase allows for an immediate solution to a problem until it can be properly bid. Keep in mind that emergency purchases are not used for hardship resulting from neglect, poor planning, or a lack of organization by the spending unit. The Purchasing Division also maintains a non-competitive exempt list of commodities and services, which is updated each July. This list can be found at Section 9 of the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. The Purchasing Director has the authority to determine that it is not possible to obtain certain commodities and services through the competitive bidding process and Purchasing Division approval is not required for these procurements unless specifically noted. However, spending units purchasing from vendors under the exempt list must continue to observe the standard purchasing procedure associated with the normal purchase of the same dollar amount, including vendor registration, and must continue to submit contracts to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Now let's discuss what to do in the event that you experience any issues with vendors. First and foremost, ensure that you understand the contract in its entirety and its requirements. Does the issue tie back to a specification that the vendor has failed to meet? Have you brought up the issue with the vendor? In some cases, they may not even know that there's an issue. Make sure to give them an opportunity to make things right. Be sure to document all efforts made to resolve the issue, including phone conversations, emails, and letters. And finally, if multiple attempts to resolve the issue have failed, you can complete the Vendor Performance WD-82 form and submit it to the Purchasing Division with all supporting documentation and correspondence. If one agency has an issue with a vendor, other agencies may as well. Having that documentation will assist the Purchasing Division in coming to a solution of how to proceed. Now that we've discussed the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division in addition to the various types of procurement methods, I'll briefly touch on other programs that are administered by the Purchasing Division. The first is the Travel Management Office. The Travel Management Office offers guidance through the state travel policy, which governs state employees who are conducting in-state, out-of-state, and international business travel with the state of West Virginia. This policy addresses such areas as transportation, lodging, meals, registration fees, other expenses, and forms of payment. Fixed assets. Agencies are responsible for certifying their inventory by July 15th of every year. The agency head must certify the date of the last physical inventory, that all items meeting entry requirements have been entered into the fixed asset system, and that all retired items were retired in accordance with surplus property policy, procedures, and guidelines. A physical inventory must be conducted once every 3 years. And the final program is surplus property. The West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property is responsible for the disposition of commodities or expendable commodities no longer needed by the state, or more specifically, the owning state agency. Surplus property must approve all methods of disposition related to the commodities, regardless of the acquisition cost. This slide leaves you with a few helpful resources should you wish to learn more about the state purchasing process, including the procurement officer listing I mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Purchasing Division's website, the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook, which I would encourage each of you to bookmark on your computer, the Vendor Procurement Guide, and our intranet site. Please keep in mind that we'll take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions you may have, so please continue to send those questions to the host. On behalf of the Purchasing Division, I appreciate your attention. We'll now prepare the presentation slides for the purchasing card portion of today's training. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Travis Molinax, and I am the training administrator from the Purchasing Card Division. And I'd like to personally just welcome everyone as we discuss and transition to the Purchasing Card Program and its benefits to the state. We have, it is my pleasure to introduce a special guest with us today, the 21st Auditor of the great state of West Virginia, Auditor McCuskey. Thank you for joining us today. He's going to open us up with some few comments and remarks. So thank you, sir, for joining us.
Sure. So I've been on these calls before, and if everyone would stop doing the regularly scheduled jobs and listen for a minute. No, just kidding. We really do appreciate you guys being on here, and I just wanted to talk to you guys for a little bit about some of the things that you guys are doing that's helping West Virginia lead really the country in a digital information sort of transformation. And from my perspective, we can't do any of the things that we do without your all's participation. So we appreciate all your all's hard work. But I just recently left a large conference of all of the state auditors and treasurers in the country. And we instituted a plan a few months ago to become essentially the first non-paper check state in the country. and nobody else had even contemplated moving to this, and many of them hadn't even really looked to understand the cost that manual check writing causes, both on the front end and on the back end. So the hope is that within the next year or 18 months, we will eliminate to the smallest degree possible all handwritten paper checks, and this really provides several benefits to the state. As you guys know, using the purchasing card and what we will soon be having as the virtual card helps the state generate revenue through a rebate, which, if you didn't know, basically fully funds the state parks, it fully funds the Hatfield and McCoy Trail, and it helps to fund the purchasing division of the state of West Virginia, on top of providing millions of dollars to general revenue. There are plans in the works working with PEIA to find a dedicated funding stream by them using the virtual card to pay their providers, which could, you know, in some of the projections that we've seen, reach several $1 million a year into the PEIA trust fund, which will help all of our health insurance stay cost effective and reasonable. Secondly, from a fraud standpoint, paper checks, particularly handwritten ones, are very difficult to find. They're very difficult to retrieve your money when fraud occurs, and they are the #1 way that people who are trying to defraud the state of West Virginia do so. What you'll be seeing in the next few months is that we have uncovered several places in which that was happening, and in a digital world, we are able to monitor and track our spending in real time and know where it's going. Which makes the job of the auditor's office much easier, and it makes our money way more secure. Lastly, it costs a lot of money just to write a check in time. The process by which a check comes out of one of your agencies and ends up in the hand of a vendor or someone to whom the state of West Virginia owes money is about 5 times that of a digital transaction. So in our terms, we believe that a paper check costs about $100 to create, whereas a digital transaction costs at the most $20. In 2008, the state legislature mandated that we begin the transformation into only using EFTs, ACHs, and PCard transactions. We shouldn't really be writing checks now, but you would probably be surprised to know that as a state we have written over 1 million checks in the last fiscal year. So if you want to look at that in a monetary way, we are spending roughly $80 million more in time than we need to be conducting the business of the state of West Virginia. These are some of the things that we're working very, very hard on. You all need to probably also know that in our audit division, we have 9 people who review every single monetary transaction of the state of West Virginia. And you can imagine the workload that these 9 people have. And so we really appreciate the fact that almost every single one of those transactions comes in with appropriate documentation and appropriately formatted. That being said, the sigmas of the errors are getting smaller, but we can make them smaller. And we really, really appreciate your all's conscientious attention to detail with regard to all of these, because, you know, we got 9 people downstairs doing what probably in a private business there'd be 200 or 300 people doing. And they really are overworked, and they are doing a great job. And we appreciate you making that a priority on your side, so that all of our jobs are easy. I believe we are under a 3-day turnaround when transactions come down to us. We don't try to be fast. We try to be accurate. We are being fast, and that's a testament to your all's hard work as well. So if you guys ever have any questions or you need anything from our office, Travis, me, Amy, you can call any one of us. Our phones are always open, as well as our doors, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have now. I don't know if this is interactive. I just sort of walked in here, so.
You can do it through the chat.
Yeah, through the chat box. If you have any questions for me, let me know, and Travis and Amy will get them to me, and I'll get them answered as soon as I can. And it's just important for everybody to remember that, you know, this is a team, right? You know, there might be different agencies and there might be different heads of agencies, but we all are state government employees, and so it is our job to make sure this government works as well as possible for the people who fund our lives, the taxpayers. So that's how I view it, and I look forward to working with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor, so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Auditor McCuskey, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us this morning. And as we transition to the slide deck at hand, we will actually talk a little bit more about what Auditor McCuskey just alluded to in his discussion this morning. And so let's just get to it. On your screen, you should see the PCard slide deck here, and we're going to first of all just talk some general information about the purchasing card program, its history. Believe it or not, the PCard program was started in 1996. We are 22 years old. A lot has happened in the last 22 years old, and certainly efforts today are being made to make the program even stronger than what it was and what it has been. And so we certainly appreciate your efforts to that end. Of course, there's the West Virginia Code and legislative rule by which our program exists for your notes. But we do ask the question when it comes to the program, why the PCard? Why is this such an important program for the state? And I really appreciate what the auditor just mentioned, because the answer to that question is very much wrapped around his comments. It saves the state money. It saves us considerably millions of dollars, especially when you compare the PCard process to your more traditional procure-to-pay type process. And we'll discuss that a little bit here in a few moments. But there's also a benefit to vendors. Using a traditional procure-to-pay process, vendors might get paid in 45 days, maybe 90 days. It's a long process, and that time delay, of course, from the vendor side of things means that they have to wait before they can restock their shelves, before they can obviously have more items available for individuals for consumers to buy, to purchase. So for them, though, when we switch to the PCard process, the vendors, they're getting paid in 2 to 3 days. And so if you're a business owner, that is fantastic, and you definitely want to be set up to accept. In this case, the PCard is under the Visa platform, so you want to be set up as a vendor to accept the PCard under the Visa platform so that you can obtain the benefits of that program. But not only is there benefits for vendors, but there's massive benefits for the state of West Virginia. And as the auditor spoke, it is very apparent that if we as a state desire to save money, which all of us do, the purchasing program can be a massive avenue for revenue coming back to the state. And for nothing else, what we'll talk about when we get to the statistics of the PCard program is the innate savings that is to be found whenever we utilize the PCard for the securing of goods or services versus the traditional procure-to-pay process. Ultimately, though, the PCard itself is the preferred method of payment for a large variety of reasons. But as you can see, the most important one is that we become a very efficient and effective process for the payment of state expenditures. There's no question that it decreases accounts payable expenses, it cuts administrative costs, it offers increased controls when it comes to monitoring of payments. Because understand, the moment that the PCard is used, that swipe of the card takes place, we know about it. We know exactly where the cardholder was located, what they bought, for how much. All of that we see right now the moment that that card is swiped. Going, if you will, the more traditional route, you don't see that. It can get lost very easily in the shuffle of paperwork. And fraud and the capturing of fraud is much more harder to obtain through the traditional route, whereas with PCard, we can see it right away. Some of the statistics for the last fiscal year, we, as a state as a whole, there were about 586,000 transactions that were processed on the PCard in fiscal year 2017. On average, it was around $631.61 per transaction. If that seems high, this is the average, and that is considering the large ticket items of such agencies like DOT when it comes to salt or asphalt or things of that nature. The total volume is $370 million. It's certainly an incredible dollar volume there, and we look to increase that dollar volume every single fiscal year, of course. But the last point, though, is the point that I want to explain to you. I have there that it's around $37 million in cost avoidance savings. Now, Auditor McCuskey, when he was speaking about the checks and the cost of the checks to the state, he mentioned that to just simply print a check is roughly around $100 per check. And whereas compared to if you a digital processing cost, instead would be around $20 for the digital processing of the same item. So there is an $80 savings there just from what the auditor shared with us. According to the National Association of Purchasing Card Professionals, they actually have established that on average it's around a $63 per transaction savings when you choose the PCard as the payment mechanism instead of the traditional procure-to-pay process. $63 per transaction savings. And what that means, though, if you think about it, is that means that regardless of the size of the item being purchased or the dollar amount, if you will, of the goods or the services being paid for, the processing cost is the same. So how many checks have been written on behalf of the state for low dollar items that are actually less, that actually cost less than the processing cost to even have the check printed? And so you have this understanding that when we use the PCard, there is an innate savings to be found. Using that $63 number as our basis here, we can do the math, and last year alone, putting the 586,000 transactions on the PCard, multiplying that by the $63 per transaction savings, we saved the state $37 million last year, just on cost avoidance. If you think about that, the natural question then is asked, well, were there other transactions that went towards a more traditional route that were not put on the PCard but could have been put on the PCard? Were there more transactions that we could have captured and saved the state money? If you think about it in this terms, if we actually would have turned around and instead of using the PCard for this 586,000 transactions, if we actually would have applied and pushed that through the traditional route, it would have cost the state $37 million more to just process those 586,000 transactions. Do we have $37 million extra dollars hanging around to do that? I think we would all agree that being fiscally responsible, as we all care to be, we've got to maximize savings when the opportunity comes up. And that's what the PCard program does for the state. It maximizes our ability to save the state money just by the inherent processing cost savings that the program offers. As we transition to talk about the importance of internal controls and policies and procedures, it is important that with any program there has to be a manual, a guide that gives us some understanding of how the program is supposed to operate. And that is the State Auditor's Office PCard Policies and Procedures. And it outlines everything about the program, and it establishes, if you will, the minimum standards for using the card. Every agency, of course, has to abide by these minimum standards. They can make them more stringent internally, but minimally they have to abide by these standards. And in abiding by those standards, they also need to develop internal control procedures on how their agency is going to conduct the purchasing program internally. You need to make sure that every single person within their agency that is part of the purchasing card program is knowledgeable, is responsible to follow all of the policy procedures and applicable laws and guidelines. But not only the card holders and coordinators, but of course all the supervisors and managers and CFOs and department heads, which is why you guys are on the phone today, is to learn about the PCard program. I recently had a conversation with an individual that would be a CFO for their agency, and just talking with them and trying to capture an understanding as to who within their agency needs to be knowledgeable of these policies and procedures. And within that conversation, it became known that there are actually people internally to that agency that are looking at PCard transactions, reviewing those transactions, but are not identified yet as a coordinator. And that's part of that education that you all need to understand, of course, as high-ranking officials for your agency, that anybody that sets eyes on PCard statements, on PCard transactions, PCard information, they need to be fully knowledgeable of the P&P and their duties and responsibilities. And from our perspective, they would be classified as either a cardholder if it's their own things, or a coordinator if they're reviewing or putting eyes on someone else's PCard information. And we need to make sure that we capture who those people are so they can take adequate training. Ultimately, though, the agency head shall serve as the top person. They should serve as the CFO. And, of course, the CFO is responsible for the administration of the program. They need to make sure that it is monitored correctly, that they have all the controls in place to ensure no fraud is occurring, that misuse and abuse does not occur. It is their responsibility. All transactions are applicable or allowed, assuming that they are following all the rules and the laws and policies that are in play. We as a PCard division, we will never give the go-ahead to state that, yes, you can buy this item, or yes, you can buy that item. That is not under our jurisdiction to make. But if you follow all the purchasing rules and guidelines and laws, and you're given an okay to move forward, then certainly the PCard can be used as the payment mechanism. Now, there are different types of PCards that are available. We have what is called the one card. We have the, well, the one card itself is the basic purchasing card. It is not locked down by any merchant category code. It is the certainly the most widely used card currently within the purchasing card program. And I'm sure, no doubt, some of you maybe on the line today have a one card in your possession. We also have a travel card. That travel card is locked down to travel-related merchant category codes. And the Ghost card as well has the same idea. The Ghost card is a travel-only Ghost card. We actually have two varieties of Ghost cards. We have a travel-only as well as an accounts payable or an AP Ghost account. But traditionally, most agencies that have a Ghost account, they utilize it for travel-related purchases, and therefore that Ghost account is locked down to travel-related merchant category codes. We do have the virtual card, as the auditor alluded to earlier in his remarks. This is an up-and-coming process of securing or paying for goods or services through a virtual card platform. We will, as that information comes more prevalent, we will be sure to release that information to everyone. But in a nutshell, what it basically does is that there is not a physical card in play. You would have a cardholder, for example, going to a vendor trying to secure or needing to secure the goods on behalf of the state. The vendor would receive from the bank a virtual card number, and they would process the transactions through this virtual card number, which would be a one-time use number. Once the transaction is processed, the cardholder receives the goods or the services are paid for, and that number disappears, never to be used again. The idea behind this, of course, is for security purposes. How can we make the purchasing card or the credit card industry more secure? And the virtual card platform is certainly the next layer or the next step in that end. We do have fleet vehicles available under the purchasing card program, as well as our emergency cards for the purposes of state of emergency situations. Those are available. But I do want to bring to your attention, just in case you do not know already, we have a new bank that has partnered with the purchasing card program. Our new bank is the U.S. Bank, and most recently we have fully implemented the U.S. Bank platform with our PCard program. All new cards have been issued, and we're still working through a few agencies that through this process to ensure that all of their people that need to have cards have cards. It's a bright orange looking card. Should be much easier to identify in the wallet or purse of a cardholder so they do not accidentally use it for personal purchases. But if you have any questions about these cards here or anything related to the U.S. Bank implementation, you are more than welcome to email us at pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. Again, that is pcardoperations@wvsao.gov, and we would be happy to supply any answers to your questions. Continuing on the understanding of the importance of security in the credit card industry, it was Visa, MasterCard, American Express, some time ago, they instituted a chip and PIN technology to their cards. Many of us, if not all of us, have that in play with our own personal credit cards, debit cards in our own life, and we know that with the chip and PIN, the PIN associated with the card is something that the user establishes for him or herself and needs to make sure that remains to themselves. They are not to share that information. PCard security is very important. No one is to have access to the cardholder's information at all, except for coordinators who have received the appropriate training to be able to review and monitor cardholder accounts, and so naturally they would, but bank statements, for example, need to be secure. The card itself needs to be secure, and it is the cardholder's responsibility to ensure this takes place. We as a PCard division understand there are circumstances where a user is needing to secure goods through online, and upon going to checkout, all of a sudden it becomes made aware to the user that, oh, this is going to go through PayPal or maybe Amazon Marketplace or other third-party payment processors. When this occurs, the cardholder needs to stop what they're doing, and they actually need to get a hold of their coordinator, who would then need to contact the PCard division, submitting a request, if you will, a waiver, to be approved from our office prior to the transaction being made. The reason why this is the case is because when you go through a third-party vendor, you are not going directly, of course, with the vendor as an A-B type transaction. You're going away from that. You're going to a third party, and therefore you are losing your rights to dispute that transaction should a dispute need to take place. And you therefore, as an agency, when you submit the waiver, are signing off that you understand this, that you are taking the responsibility for any such waivers, and that you will be sure to monitor that, and you need to get the permissions, of course, through the waiver process so that we are aware of that as well. But not only do you need a waiver through third-party payment processing situations, but also if you are an agency that needs to secure gift cards, you also need prior approval for that. Most of our friends in higher ed request gift cards for the state on behalf of their agency and what they're trying to do at the higher ed level. And certainly that is open for any questions. If you had any questions about gift cards or third-party processors, we are more than happy to discuss that with you. But ultimately, you would have to have a waiver in place before we would be able to, and then we would grant that permission, assuming it has not gone through in advance of that. And then once we grant the waiver, then you as an agency would be able to move forward on the securing of those gift cards based on the needs at hand. West Virginia is tax exempt. Any purchase of any goods or services within the state of West Virginia is tax exempt. You cannot dispute tax. If the cardholder sees on the receipt that tax had been applied, they need to conduct or call, the vendor or reach out to them face-to-face to try to get it resolved. And if they are able to do so, then the vendor should issue a credit for the amount of the tax, and that credit should go back to the PCard itself. But the state of West Virginia is always tax exempt. A convenience fee or checkout fee. This might be new information to some of you. The idea behind this is that the vendors, we're talking to the credit card industry, And understanding that as a vendor, when you set up yourself to accept a credit card, there's an exchange rate that you have to pay. And this exchange rate, they, as a vendor, were wanting to figure out a way to not have to pay it. So the credit card industry decided that a checkout fee would be acceptable in the situation to where a vendor would have to post to the consumer that please be aware that if you utilize a credit card for the securing of goods or services, that a percentage, and then they would tell you what that percentage would be, is allowed to be applied to the bill. And then you as an agency, of course, would then be notified of that and then move forward with the securing of the goods. Vendors are allowed to do that. They are allowed to charge a percentage fee. It's called a checkout fee, but they must hang a sign, and there's a lot of guidelines for that. They must make it be known to the cardholder at the time of the transaction that there would be a fee. It would be a percentage fee, and that is a checkout fee. That is different, though, from a convenience fee. A convenience fee is the idea of utilizing a different means to secure the goods that you're trying to secure outside of the standard means of business or standard business operation for the business. For example, if you were going to go to see a movie at a movie theater, you would generally just go straight to the movie theater and you would buy the tickets. But you could have the option to go online and to utilize some of the online movie theater options like Fandango.com and secure the goods through that means. Now, if you would do that, Fandango would have the option, and it would be a convenience fee that they could charge. This would be a flat rate fee. It would not be a percentage, but would be a flat rate fee. So again, convenience would be a flat rate. A checkout fee would be a percentage. There are within the code, within the code, some penalty fees that could occur for any transaction that should or could have been put on the PCard but was not. So we talk about the importance of proper utilization of the card. Ultimately, I ask you this question. When you think about the items that, the goods and services that are paid for, when you think about your agency as a whole, are there vendors that right now that you are paying or utilizing and paying through the traditional procure-to-pay process? That when you actually call them up maybe or talk to them and says, by chance, do you accept the Visa as a form of payment? And they say yes. Then under the understanding of proper utilization, we would ask the question, why not choose the PCard as the payment mechanism for any vendor that accepts Visa? And there are many reasons for that, but the most important that the auditor even brought up to the point is just how costly it is to the state when using the traditional route and how much savings there is in play when we use the PCard. So as a note to self, if you haven't or you do not know the full list of vendors that you as an agency utilize, you might consider, or at least we would recommend, maybe taking a look at that list and seeing if there are vendors on there that you're currently, that does accept Visa as a payment mechanism, that you're currently not using the PCard to secure those goods, and would certainly encourage you all to consider using the PCard as that payment mechanism for those vendors. I'd like to transition now just to talk about the importance of the coordinator within the agency. The coordinator, from our perspective, is such a vital person within an agency, and really the success of the program comes from the ability of that primary coordinator to do or to conduct their job well. As alluded to earlier, the CFO or the agency head shall serve or designate somebody to be the CFO. If there's not a CFO in place, the agency head, of course, naturally is that person. And if there's any question about how the program should be run, they need to give an answer to that question. And the proper utilization of how to use the card, they need to be fully up to speed with how your agency is utilizing the card in the forms of the variety of vendors that you guys utilize for the payment of goods and services. But for the coordinators themselves, they need to make sure that there's enough coordinators, or the CFO, excuse me, needs to ensure that there's enough coordinators at the agency in order to conduct the business well. Many times with the implementation of Oasis, we have talked to agencies, and it has come to our attention that they've had to, well, increase their coordinator level. They used to have maybe one coordinator in play, but now because of the volume, they need to have a couple other coordinators to do the workload. And that's wonderful. That's great, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. We would encourage you to take a good hard look as you consider your program internally and make sure that you have enough coordinators in place so there's sufficient time for them to do and perform their duties and responsibilities well. The knowledge and experience of coordinators we take very seriously. Besides the fact that they are required to take training every year, we also offer a coordinator conference for our coordinators, and actually tomorrow is a makeup session for our conference we had in April in Charleston at the Marriott Hotel. It was very well attended, and we certainly appreciate everyone that was able to attend that conference and look forward to those who will be joining us tomorrow as we discuss the U.S. Bank program and how things have changed with that. But they are, as a coordinator, of course, to hold this position of knowledge and experience that they are the go-to people internally. If there's any PCard related question from cardholders or the CFO, they should be able to go to the primary coordinator and they should have the answers, and then together work to get those answers if they don't know by contacting us in the PCard division, and then we can certainly provide those answers. But it is important to understand that within an agency, life happens. And if you're an agency that only has one person as the primary coordinator, only one person that has the authority to authorize payment of transactions, from a policy and procedures perspective, we recently changed, well, recently being a few years ago, changed to require that every agency has what we are calling a financial PCard coordinator, minimally to act as a backup coordinator in those situations when life happens and the primary coordinator is unavailable to fulfill their duties when it comes to payments and making sure that everything gets paid on time. A lot of our agencies already have established a co-coordinator relationship. If you don't have one, I would encourage you to consider who within your office could maybe step up and assume some of those duties as either the financial coordinator that has knowledge of accounting that would be able to be responsible as that backup should the primary not be available, or somebody to step up even greater as a co-coordinator and might even help take some of the load from the primary on a day in and day out basis. No cardholder shall be their own coordinator. This is not a new rule. This is an old rule that's always been in existence. And the importance for this is that obviously we don't want a situation without there being a waiver already in place, but we don't want a situation that an individual can be a cardholder and buy the goods, secure the goods, and authorize payment for those goods without there being a proper review. And so that's why this rule exists. We need to make sure there's proper oversight, segregation of duties, and that everyone, every single transaction within an agency is clearly reviewed and can be able to verify and solidify that it's for official state business. Anytime that a coordinator assumes the duties of a coordinator, or a person that assumes those duties, they have 30 days to complete the training, and that training could be coordinator training, ethics training, or if they are also a cardholder, they would also need to sign the accept the cardholder agreement form. But they have 30 days to complete this. The additional training available to spending units is always available, and we have the option to come to you on a face-to-face if you would like, or maybe you can come to us if you have some additional training requests. We are more than happy to do that. If you ever desire for one of us to come and to provide some training, whether it was within how to do the reconciliation within Oasis, how to connect the dots from having a procurement document and having the PCard transaction release the encumbrance of those procurement documents, we can come and provide training on that. So yes, you can use the PCard to release encumbrances on procurement documents. And this is a next level to that process of reconciliation that we would certainly welcome those conversations with you. The next slides just speak about the different duties and responsibilities that coordinators have. Certainly this is not a full list, but a good, thorough list nonetheless when it comes to the duties of the coordinator. Certainly won't read through them all, but I do want to bring up the fact that the canceling and destroying of PCards, we had to do much of that as of late because we transitioned from our old financial institution, Citibank, and are now with U.S. Bank. So there was a process of needing to cancel and destroy all of the old Citibank cards and, of course, implement the new U.S. Bank cards. So the coordinators were pivotal in that success. Any dissemination of information naturally needs to come down through the ranks. Possible ethics law violations, we need to know about it right away. And the reviews of PCard utilization, I do want to bring up at this point the platform of business intelligence within Oasis. You might be familiar with that already. So business intelligence is our reporting engine within Oasis. For PCard, we have our own file, if you will, under the procurement folder. Within there, we probably have close to 10 to 12 reports that are available for you to conduct your business at the highest level possible. If you do not have access to BI, you certainly can contact Oasis to obtain access to BI. If you have questions on how to run the reports, you can contact us, and we'd be happy to help you there. There's also the reports team at Oasis that would be able to help you. But BI itself is a very important place for you to go. If you are a coordinator listening and you have not visited BI, there's a few reports that I would welcome you to take a look. The one is the BI report number 1 and number 8 specifically. Those two reports would provide some great insight. The first one is your demographics to make sure that all of your cardholders, who are the people that exist for your purchasing card program. It will give all the demographic information. And then the number 8 report is your spend report. This would be a crucial report when it comes to reconciliation that you can use on a month-to-month basis. Any internal or external audits that are conducted, and we know they do happen, you need to make sure that the coordinator needs to make sure that they adjust whatever internal control procedure adjustments that need to be made, that they do so. And then once those adjustments are made, we need to make sure that we receive new copies of those internal control procedures, as it is important for us to have the most current copies on file. These are very important for multiple reasons, but the most important is the fact that how do you conduct your business, the PCard program within your agency. And if you don't have something written down that explains how you conduct your business, then that's where many times we have seen opportunities of fraud occur. There's not proper oversight taking place, segregation of duties, etc., and that's when mistakes can happen. And that's when, as an agency, you're kind of setting yourself up for a bad situation if those internal controls are not established and they are not followed. So please be sure to double check that. Every single month, we have to pay the bill. Just like at home in our personal lives, we've got to pay the bill on time, and the PCard program is no different. We need to make sure we pay our bills on time. With U.S. Bank, though, we do have new cycle start and end dates. This is a change from Citibank. We have communicated at our coordinator conference last April the changes, and we continue to communicate through email to our primary coordinators regarding those changes. So let me just speak to that now. When it comes to the billing cycle date for U.S. Bank, the new end date would approximately be the 15th of each month. Therefore, the 16th of each month would be the new start date. The only time that would change is if the 15th, the end date, happens to land on a weekend or a holiday. And if it does, then the new end date would actually be the first business day after the 15th, whenever that would occur. So that change, that cycle date change, will impact all of the transactions when it comes to U.S. Bank transactions, and we will be sure to update Oasis. There's a table within Oasis that all that information is contained, and we will update that table and pass that information along to the primary coordinators, who, of course, their job is to make sure it gets disseminated to everyone, including yourselves, if you are the head of your agency, the agency head, or the CFO, if you don't already receive that information. When it comes to the scheduled payment dates, with the 15th and the 16th, 15th the end date, 16th being the start date of each month, that means the scheduled payment date will approximately be 15 days after the start date. So, for example, for this month, the 15th was the end date, the 16th was the start date, which means our scheduled payment date for U.S. Bank transactions would be the 31st of this month. That's when those transactions would be due. It can be a little bit confusing this month because we have a mixture of city transactions that we're reconciling as well as U.S. Bank transactions we are reconciling. We are always recommending for our coordinators and yourself, you are more than welcome to contact us within PCard at pcardoperations@wvsao.gov if you have any questions as it relates to U.S. Bank and the payment cycles and how they are in play moving forward. We do have that information available for you, and we can make that, we can provide that to you. For a coordinator during this transition going to U.S. Bank, there was a lot of account maintenance that was going on, some new applications as well, but that comes to the responsibility of the coordinator to ensure that that is done properly in a timely manner. They need to make sure they cancel cards if there's a termination or retirement or just the person left the agency. They need to make sure they cancel those cards. And of course, any lost or stolen PCard, they need to be canceled right away. We don't want fraud to happen. We want to minimize the risk of fraud as much as we can. So the moment that a card is lost or stolen, that needs to be, the financial institution, U.S. Bank, needs to be contacted right away. Then, of course, to let the spending unit PCard coordinator know within 24 hours as well, and they will let us know immediately after that. There is an insurance policy. I don't know if you knew this or not. There's actually a $100,000 insurance policy on every single card within the PCard program, and that covers us from a liability perspective. And so we just need to make sure that all the cards are signed, that the back of the cards are signed, and that they are secure so that hopefully no fraud occurs. But if anything does come, a dispute or anything of that nature, there is an insurance policy in play. The last part of our talk here this morning, before I let you all go, speaks to the roles of the cardholder. And quite honestly, the cardholder is really wrapped around the idea of reconciliation. We have, it is always recommended that the cardholder, him or herself, be responsible for the transactions that they are doing with the card. I mean, they're securing the goods or services through the use of the PCard. And so we always recommend that the cardholders reconcile their own stuff within Oasis. But we also understand that in some circumstances, maybe there's a proxy that is reconciling those transactions on behalf of the cardholder, and that's more than acceptable. For some of our agencies, they're using interface process or other approved electronic methods to do the reconciliation within Oasis. But ultimately, all the transactions, whenever a card swipe happens, will first of all show evidence within Oasis and then have to be reconciled within Oasis. And that needs to be done by the scheduled payment date each month. The cardholder needs to make sure that they review all of the transactions that come through to make sure they're for official state business. And if anything is not, they need to take the proper steps to dispute, to question, to make sure that the state is not being defrauded of any funds. The review is important. We always recommend agencies to make sure they have an adequate amount of review. It is up to the agency to discern how much is adequate, whether it's just one level of review, 2, 3, is truly to the agency's discretion. So internally, maybe you can ask this question, you know, are we having adequate levels of review per transaction to ensure that everything is the way it's supposed to be? There's my point to business intelligence again, and you can always go there to review all the transactions and where you are as an agency as it relates to PCard. The authorization of payments is done at the transaction level, which means we're front-loaded. So if your transaction is good to go at the front side of things, then it will be good to go at the back end when it comes to the payment side of things. In our payment processing document is called a PRCC, and we need to have a PRCC for every single transaction that exists so that the bill gets paid on time. Probably the most important thing, in addition to the reconciliation process, is the understanding of supporting documentation. What does that mean? What does it mean for a transaction to happen and for there to be adequate supporting documentation? Well, what that means is that any document that supports the transaction that says, yes, I have the authority for this transaction, the receipt, the packing slip, if there was some pre-authorization internally with signatures, if there's maybe a procurement document that you want to include, whatever the supporting documentation may be, it is required, and it's required per transaction. So every single transaction must have that. In fact, in BI, we have a report. It is the 40 report that is specifically designed for you to run that would capture, and this report would tell you what transactions currently in Oasis that have been reconciled but no supporting documentation exist. None. And whatever that is, that report would give you those values. So that, again, that is the 40 report within BI on the purchasing card, the procurement card folder. You are welcome to utilize that to ensure that you have all the adequate supporting documentation attached to every single transaction. We always state that agencies should adopt a zero tolerance for missing or inadequate documentation. PCard delegation is naturally prohibited, and what that simply means is that you cannot, as a cardholder, give your card or your card information to anyone. So if you are, let's just say you happen to be a supervisor and you have an administrative assistant there, you cannot give your card that has your name on it to your administrative assistant for them to go make the transactions. You cannot do that. The card is in your name, and you should be the one that only utilizes that card. If that individual, the administrative assistant, needs to have a card because they will be making purchases, then certainly an application can be submitted for them to have a card, and therefore they can make those purchases. But you cannot give your card information to anybody. You also cannot give your login credentials to anyone for them to log into Oasis on behalf of yourself and to do whatever reconciliation that you want to do. So you can't do any of that either. So we take PCard delegation very seriously, and it is strictly prohibited. This is the West Virginia Code 12-3-10B as it relates to fraud, misuse, and abuse. It is important that we know about it right away, and it's of course needs to be initially reported to the CFO, and who would then contact our office upon 24 hours of his or her discovery. This is really important because we want to minimize the amount of the potential, the risk of fraud should it occur. As you heard from Auditor McCuskey, he takes fraud very seriously, and as we all should. And so much, in fact, that he has assembled a team together that looks specifically at all transactions to ensure no fraud is occurring. There is a new, in circumstances of self-reporting or a fraud type situation, there here on your screen are the email addresses that you can write down and have available for you should any situation occur that you need to self-report. Examples, for example, to look at would be gift cards without prior approval, third-party processors without prior approval, or personal purchases. You go to the gas pump and you use your P-card by mistake instead of using, for your personal securing of that fuel. It wasn't for a state vehicle, but it was for your own car, and it was an oops. That's a self-report. You would email PCard self-report at wvsao.gov, let us know all about it, and therefore it's on file. The fraud section that the auditor alluded to is operated and controlled by Mr. Martin Wright. He is the General Counsel and Director of the Fraud Division, and Kelly Snyder is the case manager. They are there on your screen are their email addresses. You are always welcome to contact them should you have any questions or any situations that occur that might fall under fraud, misuse, or abuse. At this point, we are open for questions, whether they are for PCard related or for the purchasing division. We have the representatives here in the room that would be more than happy to answer any questions related to purchasing or PCard. Please utilize the chat window to submit your questions. So at this time, we will just take a moment of pause to gather any questions that might come through, and then we will address those as they come.
Okay, and so far we have had 2 questions come through related to the purchasing process. And the first one that we're going to address is, are there limits on brand name or equal specifications?
This is Jimmy Meadows, General Counsel for the Purchasing Division, and I'm going to field that question. Are there limits on brand name or equal specifications? I think the question is probably, do we always have to use or equal when we specify a brand? And so the answer to that is yes and no at the same time, and I'll explain. Generally, the requirement is in 5A3, it states that if you specify a brand name in your bidding, that you have to then specify or equal, and then if you look at the Code of State Rules, it says you have to then explain what would qualify as an equal product, right? You have to, give some parameters upon which you can disqualify or qualify what an or equal is. Now, we know that this is one of those topics that's pretty contentious from time to time, and so, the Purchasing Division has worked with a lot of different agencies and the legislature and the governor's office, and we have actually been successful this past legislative session in creating an exception to the or equal requirement, which we would call standardization. In the passage of Senate Bill SB 283, which was a governor's office supported bill, we created a standardization process that would allow agencies to, if certain parameters are met, pick a set of commodities that they feel like they need to standardize on. And so, perhaps in the technology realm, there's some opportunities for that. Really, any realm could take advantage of this. But the idea is you would take a set of commodities, you would research, you would evaluate, you would compare costs and long-term and things like that. And at the end of this process that's established, it will be established in 5A-3-61, you could emerge with a standard. And so once you've done that, you then come to the Purchasing Division and say, hey, we've established this standard per the code. Please go out to bid for the brand. And you wouldn't have to specify or equal after that in that circumstance, because you've essentially kind of done the competitive analysis on the front end through the standardization process. So now on the back end, all we really care about is, are you providing me what I asked for and who's the lowest price? So we're really happy that we've been able to work with a whole lot of people. This has been more than 2 years in the making, and so we're really hopeful that standardization is helpful to the agencies as we move forward.
Okay, our next question, which is also related to purchasing, is how do you handle competitive bidding when vendors are limited for some materials in some areas of the state, such as crushed stone or concrete? For example, if you call a vendor outside of your area and then you're then told that that is out of that vendor's territory for competitive bidding.
This is Frank Whitaker with one of the assistant directors here with the Purchasing Division. And when we have products that are regionalized, we can certainly, and that we have an agency that has a statewide bid, stone and aggregate is certainly a good example that was mentioned in the question. What we can do is we will solicit in such a way that we can award to the low bidder per region, and the region can be defined a number of ways. Very often division of highways districts or a region, but however it makes sense for the commodity you're bidding, and your market research shows that, you know, these vendors can supply these areas or these locations, you can award based on region, you can award based on location, receiving the goods or services, and we just build that into the solicitation up front so that you know that as a vendor, if you happen to be low bid meeting the mandatory specifications for a particular county or a particular state region as defined by the specifications, you will receive the contract for the work in that region, and then we would divide the state or the area up in that way. So we have that as kind of a normal practice for bidding goods and services that are regionalized. Certainly it doesn't make sense to haul gravel from the northern panhandle to the southern coalfield. That doesn't make sense, so we would split that contract regionally. Same for concrete and such.
General Counsel Jimmy Meadows again, and I would echo what Frank said and suggest that you hit on a really important point there. The key is market research. You need to know where your vendors are willing to supply and adjust your pricing page accordingly. So you hit on a good point. It might be not regionalized so much as a per delivery location, and the vendors then know that if they respond to this, that they're obligated to perform. And in the event that they don't, right, you know, you're potentially looking at a breach of contract action and things like that. So, you know, those are just some considerations to keep in mind as you're building a contract that's going to have a regionalized or a per location delivery requirement or some of those things.
Yeah, and the spec needs to be clear on the expectation to the vendor community.
Yeah.
Okay, we're now going to jump to a purchasing card related question, I believe, and it refers to documentation for travel cards. So what really is gained by providing receipts for these types of charges? There's generally no detail beyond the transaction as it is reflected on the statement, so why can't the traveler merely sign off on the charges?
So if I'm understanding the question well, and I don't think the question stated exactly what travel-related purchase they were making. I don't know if the person can make a quick comment on that, what specific travel-related specifically they were thinking. But let's say if it's a hotel, that you're staying in a hotel, certainly the hotel folio would be adequate. Naturally, that would serve as a receipt and also give the details of who the vendor is, the hotel, the address, phone number, all the specific details of that vendor. So that would serve as your receipt.
Any travel.
Can be any travel-related. Ultimately, the idea when it comes to supporting documentation is not the idea of trying to find this massive amount of documentation just to fill documentation. But whereas the idea, even travel-related, is the fact that any purchase, whether it's travel-related or, if you will, non-travel-related, there will be at least minimally a receipt. And that receipt within the policy procedures in Section 7 dictates very specifically the requirements of what's supposed to be there on the receipts. And so when it comes to supporting documentation, those requirements in Section 7 is what we draw from. Typically, so from a traveler perspective, that might be the hotel folio. That might be just your receipt at a gas station that accompanies it. And that might be all there is. It's just simply the receipt. As long as that receipt has, again, the vendor name, address, itemized, of course, on that receipt, giving the full value of the unit value, the total price, everything that's on there as dictated in Section 7 of the policies and procedures, then that is fine. So if there's an internal, because I know many agencies have maybe some internal policies and procedures as it relates to travel-related items, they are more than welcome to add those to that. And we do have, within PCard, we do have a travel division that obviously this is what they do when it comes to travel-related questions. I would encourage you to email them. It is simply pcard_travel@wvsao.gov. If my answer, if you're still not satisfied with my answer, you're more than welcome to email our travel team, and they would be able to answer maybe some more specific questions related to travel. Again, that's pcard_travel@wvsao.gov.
Thank you, and just a reminder, you can continue to type questions into the chat field we are going on to our next question, which is for the Purchasing Division. And the question is, does the Purchasing Division have a form of specifications for auditing services?
Yes, this is Frank Whitaker again, and we do not have a template built per se for auditing services at this point. We're just now beginning the process of creating a specification repository that we're going to keep on our website for commonly used commodities and services. The struggle is, you know, very rarely are specs generic enough and an agency's needs generic enough that you can pull one set of specs and just kind of echo those, change the quantities needed, and put it back out to bid. The items that lend themselves to that very well have already been established on statewide contracts. So we are creating some specification libraries that are basically jumping off points. You can go, you can download some of those and then take those and do your market research and edit and modify those to fit your needs. We do not have one in place for auditing services at this point in time. I don't know that we've looked at that one yet. Certainly we can. We do have the services template, which at least gives you the kind of standard template to plug in your needs. And then, you know, whether it be auditing or other goods and services, we're always very quick to suggest that agencies talk to their peer procurement officers. And if you know an agency that that's doing auditing services, they may be able to give you a set of their specs that you can look at and modify those to fit and meet your needs, and certainly talk to your buyer and they would give any guidance they can. But yeah, we're continuing to look at what we're doing as far as the specification repository, and there may or may not be something out there for either accounting or auditing type stuff. We'll look at that as we move forward. I don't know that that answered the question, but the short answer is no, there's not a template now for auditing services, but there are some good tools to help you get there.
This next question, we receive very poor janitorial service in our office. It is through a wharf provider. This is the only wharf provider that will serve this office as it is located in a far area of the state. Is it possible to switch to a private cleaning firm?
This is Jimmy Meadows again, and so I think perhaps a discussion for just a minute about what the wharf janitorial program is and what it's not is probably in order. That's actually a program that is mandated by state law, and it's established with an oversight committee comprised of government officials, and they're responsible for overseeing the activities of the individuals that work there. And for those of you that don't know or perhaps are new to state government, that entire program was created with the purpose of employing handicapped individuals. And so, really, it's a social program. It's not a competitive bid. It's not intended to provide you with the best price, but the law does say that they have to provide you with, adequate services at fair market prices. And again, we point back to the committee as the entity that's responsible for making sure that those services are in fact provided as they should be and that the price is in fact fair market. So to the question of can you, go to a private provider, the answer is, well, only if there's not a, entity within the WARF program willing to provide. And it sounds like there's at least one that's willing. So then the question becomes one of, well, are they providing adequate service? And to the extent that they're not, I think the code and rules provide for, some opportunities to raise those issues with the committee that oversees the program. So that would be the recommendation number one. Make sure that the committee's aware. Well, first, make sure that the provider's aware that the services they're providing aren't up to contract expectations. And then second, make it known to the committee that there's an issue here that needs to be addressed. So that's probably the first avenue of trying to get this issue taken care of, and I would suggest doing that before any other steps are taken.
Okay, and we've gotten several more purchasing-related questions. So the first one that we'll address is when we bid or equal for computer equipment, we often get items that look equivalent on paper but tend to be lower quality. Is there any recourse?
this is Jimmy Meadows again. That is one of the very reasons why we ask for the agency to specify what it is that makes an equivalent product. You know, we're going to want to have that listed out in the specifications, and that provides us with the ability to, you know, certify that this product is an equal and that we can, you know, disqualify that particular vendor. And I would again point to the new law, SB 283, which allows us to standardize on certain commodities and services. I think computers would be a fantastic opportunity for an agency that has you know, knowledge in this area to get 3 or 4 or 5 different computer manufacturers and to test them and to, you know, figure out what's best for the state and quality and all those kinds of things, and to then establish a standard for the period of time allowed that we can, you know, utilize to go out to bid for computers.
Our next question, will there be a new statewide contract for flooring awarded in the future, for example, tile, carpeting, et cetera?
We have not renewed the flooring contract recently because we have not been able to document much statewide contract usage on that to I don't use the word justify, but to have a statewide contract for those goods and services. Certainly when we are looking at either renewing or getting rid of a statewide contract, we send out a survey to take a look at statewide need and usage. If there's, very often flooring is done as a subset of a construction project, so it's not purchased separately and outright. So in those cases, it wouldn't make the statewide contract. If there is certainly a need for a flooring contract, we would certainly entertain reintroducing a statewide contract for flooring. So we'll be glad to take a look at that.
Okay, and we have another question that says, please describe recent changes in legislation that allow multi-year contracts, including dollar limits, types of contracts eligible, how many years, et cetera.
Jimmy Meadows again. I'm not exactly sure what direction this question is going. I know it relates to Senate Bill 283, and there were probably 15 different changes and statutes that were impacted. We're going to have a webinar to address all those, I believe, Samantha, in the near future. June 4th. So that'll hit a lot of those questions. In general, I know that you know, some of the things that changed in the construction realm are that open-end contracts for maintenance and repair are now allowed, limited to $500,000, and I think there's a term limit on those of 3 or 4 years in the statutes, but it would still be subject to the 1-year plus renewals that we're going for. So that would be the change to the construction. And so then the question continues with open-end AE contracts, job order contracts eligible. Actually, you know, 5G was not modified to allow open-ended AE. It still requires that the project be identified. That wasn't a change implemented in SB 283. And then second part, job order contracts eligible. I don't believe the legislation addressed job order contracting, but it did allow for open-ended maintenance, provided that maintenance is in some way described and limited to $500,000 over the contract life.
Okay, we don't have any other questions at this point, so we'll give you just a couple more minutes if you want to continue to type your questions into the chat box. Okay, we do not have any other questions. With that said, I did want to let you guys know that we have recorded today's webinar, and we will be posting that on the Purchasing Division and State Auditor's Office websites within the next couple of weeks. So if you have anybody within your office who is not able to participate into today's webinar, please have them check back on our website. We will also be sending an email to our designated procurement officers once that is posted to let them know. Upon viewing that webinar recording, they will need to submit the certificate of completion to the Purchasing Division in order to get credit for viewing that webinar. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact any one of us via email following today's webinar. And with that said, we will end today's session. Thank you and have a great day.